everybody, and welcome back to my channel. I hope you all are having an absolutely amazing day today. If you're new here, hi, I'm Liz, aka My Pastel Past, and I'm back with another video for you all. Some of you might have seen a recent post on my Instagram and my Discord of a mini golf course path that I made, and so for today's video, we're actually going to be making that exact path. I really hope you enjoy this build, and I hope that you might find some use of it on your islands. If you do like this content and you want to see more, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and with that being said, let's hop right into the video. So this path ended up just being kind of an impromptu, what am I going to do with my island kind of idea, and it really stuck with me for a while. I had this really awkward section at the back of my island right near my secret beach area that I was originally going to do my museum and my campsite. However, because I didn't realize that you can't move your museum when it's still in tent form, I had to scrap that idea and figure out what else I want to do with that area. So instead, I decided to create a mini golf course. So the first thing I had to do in creating this path is create a little bit of like a grass texture to kind of lay out where the path or the golf course is going to be. So I used a few different shades of green, including one kind of yellow tinted green, because I don't know if it's just the golf courses in my area, but they always seem to have like this little bit of a yellow hue to them. So I tried to do that with this path in particular. And then the next thing I did was trying to figure out the border. Now, I went onto Google and I started searching up different golf courses, or I guess mini golf courses. One in particular that I kept going back to was the one in Edmonton, Alberta at West Edmonton Mall, mostly because that's the area that I grew up in, so it's the one that I know the best. And one thing that I noticed is most of them have a border. Not all of them have a stone border like this. Some of them just have like a little indent between the path that you walk on and the actual grass path. Unfortunately, because you can't actually make a little bit of like a step up or step down in Animal Crossing using terraforming, I decided to opt in to make my own kind of stone pathwork, which is what most of this video is going to be about. Trying to create that border and trying to create different shapes. I ended up using a similar technique that what I used for the stone tile path that I made in a recent video and I did on stream recently, where instead of trying to block in the shading, I just kind of put in a few different colors to create a texture more towards the stone. And then because there are so many different parts and elements to this path, I used the mirror imaging tool a lot. It does make it a lot easier, especially when you're trying to make the path as even as possible. So when I was trying to make different sections, I just kind of used the mirroring path. However, one thing that I didn't realize is that mirror path, or the mirror tool, not path, my apologies, only works from the right to the left. It doesn't work up to down, which kind of threw me for a loop when I had to do the top and bottom sections of this path. Now, as far as I know, I don't think that there is a path that mirrors from the top to the bottom, but if there is, please let me know, because that would have really helped me on this. I ended up making a bunch of different versions of this path, I guess, and by versions I mean different border layouts. I originally just wanted to do like a basic square block, a 9-part path, and then I realized that not every golf course or mini golf course is going to be perfectly square. Some different holes are going to be rounded off, others are going to be skinnier than others, and others are going to be just large and circular. So I ended up starting off with a square border, which is what I'm creating here. And eventually I end up making a rounded edge border and then also thinner borders. I don't quite know how to describe it, but you'll see later on. It's basically just like one line of pathwork. But as this video continues, we're just gonna vibe to some music, I guess, and I'll be back in a little bit. There was one thing that I ended up having to change halfway through this build, and that was the colors of it. I realized that the grass I had originally was a little bit too bright and neon-like, so I ended up darkening it just a little bit, and then because I'd already started on the border, I had to go back and do that to almost all of the other paths. But I do think the darker version of the grass looks a lot better with the border and kind of fits more with a mini golf course. This is where one of the challenges I found with doing this path started to kick in, was when I was trying to replicate what I had on the top and on the bottom. Luckily, this was one of the easier ones since it was just simply creating the bottom part of the path without any curves or border line indent things, I guess. It was still a challenge because I couldn't use that mirror tool anymore, and I really wanted to. I was really banking on being able to use that for this entire path, and I was kind of disappointed when I realized I couldn't use it anymore. Thankfully, this part of the path is just kind of like a straight line on the bottom, and it also creates one of the other paths I was talking about before, of it being just kind of like a thinner line of a path. So it's definitely easier to do, whereas trying to create the little indents that I have are a little bit harder, but it's definitely easier than doing the rounded edges, which you'll see later on in this video. That I think was definitely one of the biggest challenges I had to face while trying to create this path. These extra little paths here are some of the extras that I created just in case someone wants to make a thinner path out of their golf course. This is also where I started the main challenge of this path, which was creating a curved line. Now, I really wanted to create like a circle of sorts, but I have no idea how to make a circle in pixelated art. So instead I kind of went for this diagonal version of it instead, and I think it turns out pretty decent in the end. This kind of path was definitely a lot harder to shade in and kind of create that brick stone effect that I was going for in the border. Definitely the hardest part of the path, but it was still a fun challenge to take on, and I think it turned out pretty well in the end. For the majority of the path so far, I had been using a relatively similar pattern in terms of how I do the shading, that being have almost like a crisscross, jagged, darker near the top right or top left, depending if it was on the top or bottom of the stone and then filling it in with the lighter two colors that I had. Now, a big issue that I had with this section of the path is that when it curves, you can't quite keep that exact same pattern, because instead of having this almost hashing effect to the stone, instead it turns into these little clumps of colors, and it didn't quite look that good. So I definitely had to mix around with it a lot more. I also realized that when it is at an angle like this, it's much harder to mirror, so instead I tried to go color by color and filling in the areas that I could, but it was still a big challenge. In the end, I found that it was a lot easier to take the border colors and do that first. That way I have an idea of where this path is. It was also much easier by doing the sides of each of the stone paths to fill it in afterwards. That way I wouldn't need to worry about where I was shading things. The easiest part of all of these paths was definitely doing the grass interior. Once I figured out how to do grass textures, it was easy sailing from then on, because everything else was really just focused on the stone and adjusting the shadings for each one of the pieces. I also found in the end it was easier just to try to copy top from bottom than going right to left when it came to the curve. Just because I didn't have to use the mirror tool, I could just look at what I had on top and try to copy the exact same shading overall. Now, it did take them a lot longer to do this because I had to keep counting the different squares in each one and trying to lay out where everything was. But in the end, it turned out pretty alright, and I'm quite happy with it. I will say though, trying to create the shading pattern on the opposite end and flipping it did kind of hurt my mind after a while. Looking at it constantly and trying to figure out, okay, is this the top or is this the bottom, was very confusing. And after a while, I just kind of gave up and decided to put some random shading in where I could, which is kind of where I'm at now. I decided that instead of having to worry about making sure that it was perfectly identical to one another, that I would just erase everything that I had and just kind of create my own shading for the bottom, that it didn't need to be exactly like the top. And I think that saved myself from having a big headache in the end, so definitely helped with that. At this point in the path making process, I was so happy and excited to finally be on the very last border piece that I wanted it done. I went back to the mirroring because on this one it was at least a little bit easier. I understood how to do the straight stones. It was mostly just the curved ones that were giving me troubles at this point. So I decided to erase the bottom left section of the stone that I already had. That way I could do the new horizontal horizontal stone and upright stone border without having much of an issue. And then once the majority of that stone was shaded in by using the mirroring tool, I just went in with the base gray color that I was using for most other things to just fill in the rest of the stone border. And then it was mostly just filling in the last remaining section and having to do the shading on that, which was super fun. I did have to go back and forth a bit since my stone border did have a very similar pathing or pattern to it, that being that it was rectangular and then had a small little 3x1 indent of shading on the edge, and I wanted to make sure it was lined up with one another, so I had to go in and out of the custom design making process of it quite a bit just to make sure that it all lined up properly. And here is the fun part. This was definitely my favorite part of the build, or I guess custom design making process, and that's making the little hole for the golf ball. And maybe that's because it was the easiest, but it was also the least stressful, so I enjoyed it the most. We mostly just made a black circular hole and added a little bit of gray shading and added a little bit of a highlight to it from where the sun would kind of hit that little area. I might go back and add a little golf ball in eventually, but I'm also thinking of using the little flags and making just like a red custom design to create a little flag to put right by the hole instead. That way it just kind of pulls the eye more as like, this is where I need to aim, and then we can have some fun with that. I made sure to make as many different holes as possible for different areas. That way if anyone did want to create their own golf course, they wouldn't be stuck with just what I had to use for my golf course, but instead they could make their own version of it. I really hope that you all end up using this path. I would love to see what you all create. This is the final product of it, and I'm actually really happy with how it turned out. I hope you all enjoyed this video, and let me know if you end up using this path. I'd love to see what you all create. And with that being said, I will see you all in the next video. Bye!